Johannesburg Mayor Dada Morero is today set to deliver his State of the City address amid ongoing concerns over service delivery failures and crumbling infrastructure. The city has come under increasing scrutiny, including from President Cyril Ramaphosa, who's previously mentioned or questioned its capacity to operate effectively. Now, as Johannesburg prepares to host the G20 summit in November this year, there is growing interest in whether any tangible improvements have been made since the president's visit and if the city, in fact, will be equipped to host this major international event. Let's think through these things with our guest. Dr Kagiso Pooe is a professor and public policy expert with the Wits School of Governance and joins us now via our video link for more. Dr. Pooe, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. You know, we live in a city where you can't really take for granted that you'll have working traffic lights, but as the team and I sat to think about how we're going to conceptualize the story, a few of them actually pointed out that they've started seeing improvements in their own communities. I wonder if this is giving you any reason for optimism ahead of today's State of the City address.
Thanks for having me. Well, look, I think there is some reason for optimism, but if we had to look at this as a system, it's actually a bit more worrying than optimistic. And by that I mean many of the things your team probably saw are some of the most basic things which needed to be addressed. Now, if you could not address the most basic things for the whole of the city and you're starting to do it in certain pockets, it worries me because it tells me you quite don't have the capacity to deal with the bigger issues at hand, such as the infrastructure related to electricity and sewerage and the like. So while we should always be optimistic, it worries me more that the city is starting to do a few little things and says to me that capacity-wise, they're not ready to roll it out en masse.
Yeah, in other words, this may very well just be window dressing. And I suppose then the question becomes, how deep is the malaise, so to speak? Often I worry that viewers who are watching now have just a sense that things aren't going well, but don't really have an understanding of just how critical the problems are. What's your understanding about what it will take ultimately to turn Johannesburg around?
I'll use 2 pointers. The first is let's just look at raw money, right? I think there's a study which basically showed that there's a backlog in terms of infrastructure related to electricity to the tune of about 44 billion. So that viewers kind of have an understanding in terms of numbers that is a backlog. Now, a lot of these studies sometimes have a time lag, which this could have been true 3 or 4 years ago. So we haven't even put in the latest inflation numbers. So that basically tells you that the longer the cities take to address the core issues of just infrastructure, the longer and the more amount of money that they need to spend. But at a most basic level, and this is how I always try to explain it, at least to colleagues of mine, to say you should be worried with the financial capital when you go to robots or traffic lights and you see people who, by all intents and purposes are not law enforcement, directing a car's worth the tune of 3 to 4 million. And law enforcement is nowhere to be found. And in this day and age where we've got drones, you've got the latest system, it says to me that people who are governing have not quite caught up with the fact that, listen, even if you've got problems to the level that the city has, where's the innovation? And that's what kind of worries me a bit, that when you see people who are, beggars who are literally doing a good thing by directing cars worth 3 to 4 million, that should give an indication that we've got big problems in the city of Joburg. And if those things cannot be attended to and there's no law enforcement, and there's no visible governance, you know that what we're in for is quite problematic.
Yeah, the contradictions are everywhere. The president in March this year announced some kind of working group which we're told will involve some kind of intervention at a national level, and you speak about lack of innovation. Does that sound like an innovative enough solution?
Whenever there's 2 words you must be very scared of in South African's political lexicon. One is questions of inquiry, is one politicians coming together as a group to try to find innovation. Those things hardly ever come together. And it's a bit worrying because why would you? It really does raise a question. Then what's the purpose of having a city of Joburg if you need an external intervention to say, listen, let's come together to go find the problems? Look, I always say this, you don't need a PhD in South Africa. Everybody knows what the problems are. And if you don't believe me, read the IDP documents of the city of Joburg for the last 10 to 15 years. Everybody knows what the problem is. So I don't see how getting a bunch of people together is going to solve the issue. Because then what we should maybe be asking is, do we need a government of the city of Joburg, or should we simply get people like yourselves or even other experts in to say, listen, for the next 7 years, here's a contract, fix the city? Because if that's what we really want to do, let's take it to the proper logical end. Let's get the experts in, let's dispense with the politicians, and let's actually get things done. Because what the president simply said there makes absolutely no sense.
Well, I can almost hear him responding to you by saying, well, we actually introduced this intervention in places like in eThekwini, and it worked.
Did it work? And that's the thing, because now people, yes, look, there were, but the key is, who did they put in? Well, they put in the former mayor of eThekwini, I think the municipal manager, if I'm not mistaken, Sutcliffe, if I'm not mistaken, which basically goes to my point, which is to say, you simply said to the politicians who are earning a salary, the councillors, hey, take a 5-minute break while we get the actual people that know what they're doing in. So that's what I'm saying. Let's take it to its logical conclusion. Let's basically suspend the politicians and councillors. Let's get the experts in. Then I'll believe it, because that's what you did in the city of eThekwini. So until you do it to its logical end in the city of Joburg, you're really just playing around with semantics, and I don't get what the president is trying to do. Because we all know what we need. We need quick expert intervention. We need quick interventions. But what the hassle seems to be is we've got a political elite that is holding on, and that's the only reason we can say they're holding on. They don't want these interventions to come in, and when we do these interventions, we camouflage them in nice words to say it's a group of people. No, what the city of Joburg needs is proper experts, and we need to suspend the politics so that we can actually get to, look, just to give you a number, it's going to take, by my calculations, about 7 years for the city of Joburg just to catch up and to actually start functioning. Now, we're not even talking about putting in the latest type of infrastructure where we can actually jumpstart the city to the level to compete with its compatriots, never mind outside the continent, but on the continent itself.
Sure. We know that a big part of what's going to be the focus of this address is an imagined city, and I'll ask you about what that looks like, at least in your head, towards the end of our interview. But there's also been a lot of focus around these buildings that are essentially being occupied illegally, mostly in the inner city, and it almost feels week in and week out that we're at the brink of yet another disaster like what we saw happen at Usundiso. Again, in my mind as a layman, the pathway to that solution is very clear. Focus on getting people out, refurbish the buildings, and hopefully generate an income. But that doesn't seem to be happening, and I just can't put my finger on why that's the case.
Well, it's a combination of two things. One, this issue of always running to courts, it's a South African disease. Look, courts make sense for legal issues, but I always say this, our legal system is not really caught up with local government, right? One of the, I think problematic cases in South Africa was the Fruitboard case, which says you simply cannot evict people without giving them alternative accommodation. On the face of it, that is a very good thing. But what you raised, what do you do when you see the building is dilapidated and it's actually a danger for the people occupying it illegally? Now, the government will probably say, especially local government, our hands are simply tied by the courts. So I think what we really need there is almost an undoing of the legal systems like that, while protecting the fact that we just don't want to kick people out. Because if you're again looking at the inner city, what Joburg inner city needs is, never mind just refurbishment, we need demolition a lot of those buildings. But you cannot do that when you believe that you're going to be legally hamstrung. So you spoke about the idea of how do you reimagine the city? Well, if you look the world over, when you have to rebuild CBDs, you don't even have to go very far. We can just go to places like the city of Cape Town. So there's key questions of what would have been learned from the city of Cape Town. But if I had to extrapolate it for the city of Joburg, I think we probably need to, and I say this, look, with caution, not to say this is the only way. I think there's certain laws which we need to relook at and contextualize for being able to demolish cities, and also how we refer to these cities. And that might mean suspending a few laws and the like. And I know certain people are going to get up in arms about it, but I think it's the only way you can do it. Because the CBD is supposed to be a livable and a business-friendly place, and at the moment, Joburg CBD is nothing like that.
Yeah, sure. We know, of course, that a big part of the focus is also going to be around this G20 summit expected later this year. And given I think you said we need 7 years to just clear the backlog alone, we simply don't have the luxury of that time till November, when the summit is going to, or is expected to take place. So given those constraints, what ought these officials focus on in order to at least host that international event with some level of dignity?
Well, look, when it comes to hosting of international events, I never really worry about South Africa. For some reason, we're great at putting on a show. it's the problem that comes afterwards, which is how do we govern such that the show becomes the norm for most citizens in South Africa. I think that what they'll do is they'll probably find some very lovely places in Johannesburg where they can camouflage some of the key weaknesses of the city. But the worrying thing for me has always been this, and it's the same thing with stemming from the World Cup and other events South Africa has hosted. Why do we always need international events to get people to do the job that they're supposed to do on a day-to-day basis? And I think that's what probably angers a lot of citizens, the fact that now people are hearing G20 and seeing improvements. So the key question becomes, were we not important before the G20? And I think that's the frustration I have with a lot of the way government does things, that we can put on a show. That's why I have no issue. South Africa will host a great G20. That's never the issue. The issue is, why can't you do this, put the same energy that you're using for G20 for the mundane things of the day-to-day to make the city work and to make the republic work better?
Sure. Interesting as always. Dr Kagiso Pooe, thanks very much indeed for your time and your insights. And we'll wait for 1 o'clock, I think, is when that address is meant to be given. And I wonder what you'll make of it on the other side of that. But for now, Kagiso Pooe, a public policy specialist with Wits School of Governance, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. Once again, the Mayor of Johannesburg, Dada Morero, will speak at around 1 o'clock today. We'll get you a sense of what that entails as soon as he takes to the podium.